here are the 9 things that I think are most important in order to scale your MSP to 5 million, 10 million and beyond.
In this podcast, we'll learn from Brian Hoppe, who is now an executive business coach for IT service companies or managed service providers. Brian shares how he grew an MSP that he worked at, and then he bought one that had 5 employees, which he grew to 45 through acquisitions and partnerships, and eventually sold it to a private equity firm a couple of years ago. Whether you run an MSP or other service business, or you're a coach yourself, you'll learn a lot from Brian's journey. And here we are with Brian Hoppe, who has built several MSPs and grown them, and now he coaches companies. Brian, I'm really excited to have you on the podcast.
Absolutely. Super glad to be here.
Let's start with a little quick introduction about yourself. Just tell me, what was your journey?
Yeah. So long journey starting in the early 2000s. I got into the industry. I studied IT in school, in college, and one of the rare people, most people I talked to in the industry were like history majors or something like that, religion. But I actually started in that knowing what I wanted to do. But I got involved with another gentleman who had started his business around the Y2K, replacing computers and all that, end of the world, et cetera. But then shortly thereafter, we were acquired by a family office, a Forbes billionaire. And so we grew that company inside of kind of the family office environment. And in the 2007 range, switched that over from the old break fix model over to managed services. Grew that through 2015 to about 45 employees. And then that's when I left and decided, hey, I would to do this for myself as opposed to for somebody else. And so bought into a small MSP, about 5 individuals. And we were partnered up with a credit union software company. So we were as a referral partner and very close, almost like a sister company. And so we were focused on credit unions. So we grew that for a couple of years. And during that time, we were in process of searching for a company to acquire, another company to acquire. And so in 2018, purchased another MSP that was focused on community banks. And so we combined the credit unions with community banks as our market focus. And then grew that company through to sale to private equity in 2021. So I worked for the buyer for a little over a year. And then at that point is when I left and started my coaching practice. So now I work with owners, CEOs, founders of MSPs to help them grow and scale their business.
That's pretty great. One of the things I really like about your journey is, unlike many other founders, you actually bought a company that existed. And I'd like to dive into how you buy a company. So granted, it was 5 individuals. And many times people think, oh, I'm going to buy a company. I got to have a lot of cash in the bank. Can you describe how you bought it? Did you have a lot of cash in the bank that you used? Or did you owner finance it? What was the process?
It's an interesting, so with that one, it was an interesting journey because I didn't at that point have a bunch of cash sitting around. And so it's okay. So what do I do? So it was a lot of discussion and a lot of process. And the bottom line there is I had a financial partner. So I had somebody who was interested in the business, but didn't want to be involved in the day to day. So came in as a financial partner. So we were actually business partners, and he was more silent inside the business. And so it was part that, and it was part owner financing as part of my buy-in. And then the third component was some bank financing. And it's pretty unique that what I found is that, and it was a local bank, somebody that I've had a relationship with for a long time. It was an executive in that bank. And through a series of conversations, I was able to convince them to take a bet on me and get some financing that way as well. So there was a few components there, some business partner, owner finance, and some bank financing to go with it.
Okay, so the bank financing is debt. You don't have to give up equity. The owner financing is basically you're paying the owner almost like a cash out of the company every single month for a certain period of time until you hit a certain number. So that's owner financing, which is great, by the way, because you can buy a company, run it, and then just once you finish paying them off, then you get to keep the rest of it. And then you have the investor, which would mean that there was an equity component. So you didn't own the whole company, which is something that many MSP founders actually do. They own all their company. Maybe they've got another partner that they use to start the company with. But was that a significant stake of the business, or were you the majority owner? And how did that work out when you had to make decisions that would affect the company? Did the other partner have a lot of say in those decisions?
Yeah, and it's I'm going to say that I was very fortunate to have just a great individual as my business partner. So
Yeah.
yes, and actually it was a 50-50 partnership, and at the end of the day he owned the voting shares, right? So he could have made whatever decision, but we never came into a place of conflict on a decision, right? So
Mhm.
I made
Yeah.
all the day-to-day decisions. If there was something major, obviously an acquisition, a some significant expenditure, we bought a building, things like that, we'd obviously have those discussions, come to an agreement on them. And but yeah, at the end of the day, I was just really fortunate to have somebody that was like, hey, you run it, let me know if there's any problems, just tell me how great everything's going, and I'll stay out of it.
Yeah,
So yeah,
that's
I was
a
really fortunate.
ideal partner there.
Yeah.
Tell me about what your vision was when you bought the company. It was five employees when you got
Mhm.
started. It focused on a niche market, which many MSPs don't do. They actually focus on all kinds of companies. So I'd like to talk to you about that. When you started the company and you saw they were only focused on credit unions, what was your idea? Like, we're going to grow to more credit unions and try to capture all of them in the country, or was it more geographically focused? And how big did you want to grow that?
In my first journey growing an MSP, we were industry agnostic. Everybody was a client, and the maybe a little bit of concentration. You've got some dentists, and you've got maybe some manufacturing, some legal. So you can say you have a few specializations. What I knew after that experience was, man, it would be so much easier if we just really focused in on a particular market. And that transition is so difficult to make in an already established large MSP. And so the two things were true. One, I really wanted to, I knew that I didn't want to start from scratch. So that was part of the journey was like, yeah, I really don't want to start from ground zero. So I'd like to buy something that has something established that I can work with, because that worked better also with my natural skills, which is I'm a maximizer, right? I can the strengths finder, right? I could take something that's already there and make it better, but starting something from scratch was a little bit more difficult for me. So yeah, and then to your question on the market focus, yeah, the idea was, hey, we've got a partner over here that has so many credit unions as clients and can inroad into the industry. So we know where they hang out, we know where they're going to be, we know what's important to them, and so we've got the ability to grow. And yeah, and to the other part of your question, I knew that it wasn't going to be a local thing, right? Because we've got a handful of credit unions in our city or in our region, but statewide in Texas has, I think, the most credit unions. Maybe California has about the same amount, but other than that, they're all over the country. Yeah, our clients ended up being probably concentrated in the states around Texas where I am: Louisiana, Oklahoma, New Mexico, into Colorado, but so a concentration there, but then all over the place in the Northwest, California, Midwest, all of that too. So we just knew that we wanted to grow into that space and be really like the specialized IT provider for credit unions.
There's a saying, there are riches in niches, and I know
Mhm.
that's one of the things that a lot of people overlook, and they think that maybe I don't want to give up business. It's so hard to say no to business. So when you're doing it just for credit unions and a law firm comes by, the discipline to say no to revenue is a hard one to acquire. But it
It
looks
is.
like it's obviously clearly it helped you. What did you do to get more customers? You'd mentioned you went where they were, where they hung out. I have some ideas what I think that means, but maybe
Yeah.
clarify. What do you mean by that? You
Yeah,
went where
yeah.
they hung out.
I would say two major things. So one would be partnership. So partnering with other people. So not only are the company that we were partnered with around the credit union software, but the other companies that are already in there. So they've got payment processors, they've got ATM vendors, they've got, all these different vendors that they're already working with. So starting to establish partnerships with those people, like, hey, if you go into a client and you're looking at their IT stuff and it's a mess, can we partner up on that? And a lot of MSPs are hesitant to do this, but partnership, like actual documented partnerships, hey, we're going to give you a cut of the revenue if you bring people to us. And so we absolutely did that. We built it into our pricing so we could still be profitable. And yeah, that was a big piece of it, was those partnerships. And then the other thing was just getting out to shows where they were at. We had a few particular shows that we would go to every year, bigger ones. And then there's tons of regional events that they would go to. They've got regional credit union leagues and that stuff, that You just don't know if you're not like embedded into that industry. Hey, this is where they hang out. They all know each other. They all go to these things once a quarter, whatever. Let's go get a booth there. Let's talk to some people, that kind of a
Yeah.
thing. Those were the two main ways.
That's great because if you're being an MSP for all kinds of businesses, that is a lot of different types of trade shows to go to. But when you've got that niche focus, you can really just say, nope, these are the big ones. We're gonna go to those. We're gonna present, and we are the industry expert for that. We
Mhm.
do this for other credit unions. That's wonderful. For the partnerships, did you get anything like market development funds, MDF? Did the vendors give you any kind of, hey, if you bring in a bunch of people, we'll sponsor a lunch and learn or something like that? Or was that just
Yeah, it wouldn't be MDF because they weren't our vendors. They're vendors for the credit unions. So it's
okay?
really more of a partnership situation where you're building a relationship with somebody who already has relationships with other people
Okay.
who are not your clients. So I'm building a relationship with this individual, and they're going to walk me into, or we'll go on a road trip together, and they're already visiting 5 credit unions. Hey, let's go together and just build a relationship. Just
Mhm.
get out there and say, "Hey, here's what we do. If that's ever interesting to you, we'd love to be your provider. And if not, that's great. We've got another relationship, and maybe somebody else who's a credit union leader that might need what we have." Yeah.
So you took it from 5 people to you were starting to grow. You were getting business through the partnerships and through the shows that you were going to. When did you decide want to buy another?
Oh, probably before we bought the first one. Like
Okay.
realistically, it was the strategy was, yeah, let's purchase and integrate. And my ideal would have been like one a year at the time. But easier said than done. Finding the right kind of fit. I had dozens of conversations with potential companies to acquire, but finding the right fit was a big challenge. So yeah, we actually hired a buy side advisory company to help us look for and vet and yeah, set up conversations with potential acquisitions.
Did your products or services or the packages, the bundles, did those change over time?
Yeah, for sure. Anytime any to acquire, you're going to have to change something, and because you could do an exercise, if somebody's interested in buying another company, you should definitely do an exercise around. Okay, let's take our top 10 agreements for the purchasing company and for the company being acquired. Let's take our top 10 agreements. Let's break them down. Okay, what's included? What's not included? What does the client actually expect is included but really isn't included? What are you doing even though you shouldn't under the agreement?
Hmm.
Those kind
Hmm.
of things. And then what does pricing look like? How does that line up? How do the contract terms line up? All of those kind of things, because everybody does it at least just a little bit differently. And so, yeah, finding the right fit on those. You find people who or MSPs who include projects in their agreements, and other ones that don't. And you find, and so those things they can vary wildly. And then you look at profitability on them, right? So if you're collecting X dollars, how much time are you spending based on those agreements and all of that? So yeah, they definitely changed, and it's a process over time, right? So we had several that were on, maybe when we acquired, maybe they're on a 3-year agreement and it's actually not very profitable, so we need to increase it, but we can't increase it until that other one expires. So we've got to start talking to them about it beforehand and all that. So it can get a little complicated, but you got to walk through each one in turn as it comes up and see what you can do with it and try to get it as right sized as possible to what you want to do.
So when you're looking at companies to acquire, valuation clearly comes into the mix. I talk to many MSPs, and everybody's got I need to sell for at least 5 million so I can retire. That
Yeah.
seems to be like a common number I hear. Maybe you do too. And
Five,
so
five,
five,
those are the two numbers
those are the two, right?
that I
That's the range, yeah.
yeah.
And so when you were looking to buy a company for the first one, 5 employees, clearly I can't imagine you paying 5 million for something like that. How
Yeah.
did you approach valuation? It sounds like that company might have been under 1 million in revenue. And what were your metrics that you used?
Yeah. So with that, there's so many different things that go into it. And especially with a smaller company, it's difficult because private equity is not looking at them, right? Until you're 500,000 in EBITDA, you're not getting looked at by the big guys or whatever. And so what comes into play is, okay, what do I looking at the profitability, can I reasonably expect this profitability to continue into the future? Despite what I do, right? And then do I expect it to grow? And how much do I expect it to grow? And then it starts to become a little bit of a numbers game on, okay, so I want this thing to pay for itself. And so what are the dollars out of my pocket every month going to be? Can the profit that I expect this business to generate cover those costs and pay me something in addition to that? And then it's just, I don't know, a free cash flow problem. Like I learned in my MBA, it's, hey, so what is cash flow going to be? And then is that going to cover what I'm going to have to invest in it, provide me a good return, and then essentially pay off the debt over some period of time as I grow it. So those are some of the things that went into it for me when I was calculating, or yeah, when I was thinking about that, and then get to a place where does this make sense over the long term? Yeah, and we could go into all kinds of discussions around valuation and what are all the different pieces that make that up, but that's what comes to mind when I think about your original question there.
I think many times I hear people use a metric of 5x EBITDA as a rule of thumb for valuation. So if you're a company doing $1 million a year and maybe you've got a 200K profit margin, you take 5x of that, your company could be potentially worth $1 million. If you're doing 100K a year, your company would be worth maybe $500,000. Does that sound like it's in the range? Is that still a thing, or are there different ways to look at it?
Yes, there's absolutely different ways to look at it. But what I would say is it highly depends on the company size and the pile of EBITDA dollars that are available.
Hmm.
So when I think about it and I look at going on in the industry and the private equity money that's coming in and all of that, I think what you said is probably true. If you've got a half a million in EBITDA, then yeah, you probably start at five, and then if you
Hmm.
get to a million, then it probably goes up maybe to
Hmm.
6 or 7. And then if you're two
Yeah.
million, it goes up to maybe 7 or 8. And if you're over two
Yeah.
million, it can go significantly up from there, depending on if it's a strategic acquisition and that kind of a thing. I think when you're under a half a million in EBITDA, then it's a little bit of a wild card. Maybe it's
Yeah.
three. Maybe
Right.
it's
Yeah.
four, right? Because there's a good bit more risk in there, especially if you have some client concentration. Is the big client going to leave? And then suddenly your EBITDA is not 250, it's 100, and the buyer's what in the world? Yeah, I think by and large, yes, and the bigger the company, then the higher the multiple, generally speaking.
These are some great takeaways, and I'm sure people listening can already start to have their thoughts turning about, oh, what do I need to do to actually sell my company? Where do I
Mhm.
need to be? You said a couple of interesting things, which is risk. And so when a buyer actually acquires a company, it's all about risk because they want to, one, make sure that they have return of investment, just not return on investment. And then they want to make sure that you're not concentrated with a couple of clients that if one or two of them drop for whatever reason, suddenly their business is worth a lot less than what they actually paid for. So are there rules of thumb or just some guidelines that you recommend in your coaching practice or that you've seen over time on how to de-risk your company?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a whole swath of them. So we'll talk about de-risking. Obviously, the more dollars of EBITDA you have, the better. The higher amount of revenue would be, generally speaking, corresponding to that. The next one that comes to mind is going to be the percent, like what percent of your revenue is recurring. So generally buyers are looking at, hey, I would like to be over 50 recurring. And that means managed services, not recurring. Hey, we sell millions of dollars of Office 365, right? So that percentage of managed services revenue. The next one is that comes to mind for me is going to be like, what's your rate of growth? Net organic growth. So are you consistently adding net new MRR month after month, year after year? One of the metrics that is talked about more and more is the rule of X, right? So maybe call it the rule of 40. It's usually applied more to SaaS companies,
Yeah.
but if you have 20% top line and 20% bottom line, you've hit the rule of 40. This is a really good acquisition. So that growth rate is also really big. I can keep going. You want me to keep going?
One of the
Want to
things that I
talk
know,
about some of those?
yeah, having sold a couple of companies myself, I know that one of the questions that I always get asked is what percent of your revenue comes from your top 10 clients?
Mhm.
And if that number is too big,
Yep.
it means your company is more at risk. By the same token, if that number is too small, it means that you didn't really develop some of those clients to become bigger clients because there's probably revenue that's sitting on the table that you could go after. So there's some sort of sweet spot there. And I know that there's certain ways to answer those questions when you get acquired too. And it's oftentimes these clients have been clients that does represent a good part of revenue, but they've been clients for 10 years. We
Mhm.
do not expect them to churn because of the following reasons. So things like that.
Mhm.
So you're growing the first one and you're getting ready to buy a second one, which is 12 employees ballpark, you mentioned. And so how did that acquisition go? Was it the similar process where you had debt, equity, as well as owner financing, or was it a different process to buy that?
Yeah, so that one slightly different, right? So we worked that deal for a while, and it actually didn't take that long from first conversation to close. I think it was around like 90 days, 90 to 120 days. And the way that worked was a kind of a mix of those things. So we did have some bank financing, and by that point we were more well established. We had some cash in the bank, so we could actually pay for because there's a success fee from the buy side advisor. There's obviously legal fees, there's accounting fees, and then yeah. So beyond that, there's a significant portion of cash to the buyer. We also had some owner financing as part of that, and we also had an earnout component as part of that. So you talked about risk. Earnout is one way to de-risk a little bit, to say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, listen, we're willing to pay this price, but only as long as it continues to perform. So we're going to pay you X percent. In this case, it was like, hey, we're going to pay you X percent of commissions that come in. We're going to pay you X percent of recurring revenue, X percent of this type of revenue. And in order to make you hit the number or help you hit your number, and if you hit your number, great. If it goes above, we're ecstatic because we're getting that. And then yeah, so bank financing was also part of that. So financing, owner finance, a cash component, and an earnout component to that deal.
Did the owner of that business stay on board with you for a certain period of time? Was that part of the agreement too?
Yeah, indeed. He was not quite ready to retire. And so yeah, he stayed on and really helped with the transition. Actually ended up staying on, we had planned on a year. He ended up staying two and some with us. And so yeah, it ended up working out really well.
That acquisition, the second one, was very strategically aligned with your existing business to credit unions. The second one was to for MSPs for banks. Was that specifically what you were looking for? Was something that was in a related vertical market so that you can keep a core focus?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, 100%. It was like, hey, if you can find somebody who's focused on banks or credit unions, that's exactly what we're looking for. And yes, we were very, I think we were fortunate. It's one of those things it was good timing. Somebody has a relationship with somebody who's looking to retire in the not too distant future. And yeah, and so that was definitely our desire, and it ended up being just the perfect fit at the perfect time. So
Was that also in a Texas-based business, or was that outside of the state?
it was, yeah, it was in Texas. We're in Waco. It was in Houston, just a few hours down the road.
So now you're starting to have a physical footprint that's like a bit
Mhm.
wider as well.
Yeah,
What are the techniques that you use to grow that one, or were they very similar to the partnerships and shows that you did?
yeah, I would say very similar. Yes, relationships with core software for banks and bank type trade shows, that kind of a thing, and then really just outreach. Hey, how do I get in touch with bank owners, CEOs of community banks, all of that kind of a thing? Yeah, very similar.
There's something that happens when you're a small business, 5, 6, 10 people, and then you start to become bigger, 10, 20, 30, and that's your corporate systems because you have to manage everything very differently. You probably don't know all the lives of all of your team members anymore like you did when you were really small, like almost a little family in a company. So what kind of corporate systems did you have to grow and how did that evolve? What did you need to add?
Corporate systems, I think for the industry, not a huge amount. I would say we started with a tech stack, or actually we transitioned into a tech stack having done it before. I was like, hey, we're going to start this thing off with the right tools that are configured correctly to take it to the moon. Hey,
Mhm.
this is going to bring us to 50 million in revenue if we just kept things the same. We didn't go all the way there. We sold before that, but it would have. When I think about systems though, what comes to mind is process, right? That I feel like a
Right.
lot of people are missing. And we so often when we're smaller, it's everybody knows how to do things. And so we have to have it documented. Nobody has time to document stuff, all of that. And a culture of documentation was something for me that was like, hey, this is something we're going to be doing. And we're going to have a documentation champion, and we're going to be consistently working on documentation of our core processes, not only our core processes, but our client systems, as well as how we do individual tasks, and people are going to be following those. So either whenever you're working, you're either creating a process, following a process, or updating the current process that's already there, so that the next time somebody comes and does it, they're able to do it even better and really follow those things. So I would say that's a big thing, because by the time we sold, we had a library of hundreds of processes that were in place for the business.
And that actually probably made it easier for the buyer to actually buy your company, because they knew that it wasn't just all in someone's head, that there
Mhm.
were things step by steps that they could follow. What do you
Yeah.
wish you had done sooner as you were growing?
Wish I'd have done sooner. So I'll go back to the first company in this case, because I feel like I got most of the battle scars and learned the most during that time.
Hmm.
And I kind of point back to a few things that we did that ended up making the biggest difference and really helped me to feel like, oh my gosh, I unlocked the cheat code of, hey, I actually know how to grow and scale a business now versus flailing around. So the three things I point to with that. So the first one was joining a peer group. So a group of our peers that are doing the same things that we're in a relationship with, that's looking at our books, that's acting as a board for us, that's a sounding board for best practices. And hey, have you run into this problem? What'd you do? Just unlocked something for us that we did not have before. So that's number one. Number two is a business operating system. So we did EOS, and before we found that, it was just, what do we do for annual planning? What do we do for strategy? Where are we trying to go? What's our vision? What are our core values? What's our marketing plan for this? And that just brought it all together for us. Was like, okay, now I know like actually what I need to do, not only for the big picture, but here's how we run our weekly meetings. Here's how we run team meetings with our team, and the individual teams all have weekly meetings that run this certain way, and here's why, and all of those things. So the business operating system was number two, and number three for me was what was the first time I hired a coach, and that was just a mind-blowing and game-changing experience for me. And that's when I decided that I wanted to be a coach someday. Took
Yeah.
about 10 years after that before it all came together, but yeah, such a life-changing, not only business but personal life-changing experience. So those are the three things: peer groups, business operating system, and a coach like unlocked something. And to answer your question, yeah, absolutely wish I'd have done those sooner, because it would have just accelerated everything so much quicker.
So many gems there, and I can 100% relate to your comment about coaching. And I've had a professional coach for years too. And when I was scaling my businesses, my goodness, I grew so much faster just by having someone who was looking at it and just poking at you and asking questions
Mhm.
and asking tough questions. And so that really, I appreciate that you're doing that for other companies too, because boy, can that really take you far. Let me ask you this question. As you're growing your companies, what were the KPIs that you measured? What were your most important ones?
Wow, there's so many. There's so many to talk about. I'll start with, because I'm a financial guy, it's just in my brain, so I'll start with some financial metrics. The first one is just gross margin. And it's amazing how many MSP owners I talk to, and I'm like, "So what's your gross margin on services?" And they're like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, "What? Oh my gosh, how do you run your business without this number?" Yeah, and the big mistake that a lot of MSPs make is they just start off with QuickBooks, and whatever the QuickBooks chart of accounts is, that's what they use. And so you've got maybe some different revenue buckets, but then you've got all of your people costs in this one bucket down here. It's just salaries, and it's way down right before the net income line, and or just in general and administrative expense. It makes it super hard to run a business when you don't really understand what it costs to deliver your service and what you're actually earning on your service delivery. So that's the first one I'll point to.
That's a great one to look at too. Gross
Yeah.
margin. What are some of the other ones? Were there things like the number of leads, the number of opportunities created each month, things like that that you had as
Yeah.
KPIs to measure your growth?
Yeah. So great questions. So sales metrics, right? Huge. And The few things, there are several, but the few things that I'll point to, the first one is FTAs, so first time appointments. First time appointments set. That's the number, that's the first one. That's at the top of my list. So I want to know how many first time appointments you set this week, right, with a potential prospect, a qualified prospect. The second one is going to be FTAs attended. So how many first time appointments did you attend with a potential prospect? Those two are the leading indicators for what's going to be coming down the road, right? So after that, then I want to know how many networking events did you attend? And then how many, we called it centers of influence. So how people who can potentially refer you to other people. How many meetings did you have with those individuals in a given week?
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously deals closed, right? You want to know how many dollars are in the pipeline, how many dollars of managed services versus how many dollars of project or one-time services. And then I want to know how much did you close, right? How many managed services deals did you close? How much projects did you close? That kind of a thing. Those are the big ones that I would always look at when it comes to sales.
Did you have an individual salesperson doing all this, a team of people? Did you have it separated by people who were appointment setters and then people who actually did the sale? What did that look like?
Yeah. So I'm a huge fan of principal-led selling, and because it can take you really far, right? A lot of small MSPs that I talk to are like, yeah, I'm a two-man shop, and really my next hire is going to be a sales guy. And I'm like, oh man, it rarely works out very well. It's so difficult, and it usually takes two or three fails of salespeople where and then you've got $100,000 out of your pocket, and you're like, I have nothing to show for this. So, anyways, I always try to stay very involved in the sales process. And what I would try to do, outsource pieces and parts of that sales process. So I did hire salespeople. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is it was a team sale. I'm going to go in with you. In order to close this deal, I'm going to talk to the prospect. They're going to sit down owner to owner or CEO to CEO, and that's going to have just a much better chance of closing than if I'm just sending a sales guy out there and be like, hey, go close deals. And also we did have a business development rep, and their job was to schedule appointments. So outsourcing pieces of that sales process for sure, and really sticking with principal led selling, ideally with thought leadership. So if I'm able to do a talk on cybersecurity to a credit union group, right? Fantastic. They start to see you as the authority. They want to have a conversation. Fantastic. Yeah, that's what I would say about that one.
That is the best way to grow a small business, is because you are the subject matter expert, and people, when they see your subject matter expertise on display, which is a consultative sale, that really usually tips people over the edge. So you grew this company, and all along you had a family too. You've got young kids. Now, I know a lot of people struggle with this. I know I struggled with it when I was building my companies, and you're trying to balance growing your business, which has always got fire alarms going off, with still having time to help your kids with homework and all that kind of stuff. What are your, I'm not going to call it magic tricks to make it all happen, because everybody has to find their own journey with that. But what are some of the things you did for work-life balance?
Yeah. So such an important question. I think it's beginning with the end in mind. And when I had young kids, I was okay. I'm counting years, right? I've got an 8-year-old kid. I've got 10 years left before my daughter leaves the house. And that was at the time. She's 17 now. My goodness. Yeah, I got one more year. But beginning with that end in mind. And then, okay, so what do I want? What do I want my life to look like? What do I want my family to look like 10 years down the road? Am I going to be happy with how much I'm working 10 years down the road? I'm working really hard. Or hard and long hours are two different, right? Two different things. But yeah, I think that beginning with the end in mind. And secondly, I would say my goal was always in my business to make myself as absolutely irrelevant to the day-to-day operations as humanly possible. So that was something that I always had in my head, and I think it's the stark opposite of many business owners, right? They want to be the center of everything. They want everything to run through them. They want to prove everything. They want to do all of the accounting and the other stuff that's really not that important. Or sorry, it's important, but other people can do it. So my constant thing was I'm working on delegating everything that is in my I have this quadrants, right? So the things that I don't like to do and I'm not good at, I'm working every day to get those things off my plate because there is, as much as with business owners, we think, man, if I don't like doing this, they're not going to like doing it. So I have to take the bullet for the team. But the reality is, everything that you don't like to do, there is somebody out there who loves to do it. They love it. And in
Yeah.
realizing that it was huge. And then just consistently taking the stuff off my plate that I wasn't good at or wasn't the highest and best use for the company, so that I could step away, right? I could leave for 2 weeks and business would run fine, right? And so I'll say that, and I'll finish by just saying the last one is just compressing the calendar, right? So there's spaces for meetings, right? And as CEO, it's like most of your day, it's meetings, and so there's spaces for those, and those can occur between these hours and these hours on these dates, and that's it. And then once those fill up, then if something else needs to be added, you gotta either cancel something or schedule it out to the next week. And so that piece of time compression of saying, hey, here's all the hours that I'm allocating to work this week. And after that, something's not going to get done or it's going to get pushed, and learning to be okay with that.
Yeah, I think strategic coach Dan Sullivan has this great book that he wrote with Dr. Hardy. What is it?
Who, not how?
That's the one I was
Yes.
thinking of.
Yeah, not too long ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a fantastic book because it really like goes to the heart of you don't have to do everything. And if you're thinking, oh my God, how am I going to do all this stuff? That's the wrong question. Don't ask
Mhm.
how, ask who can do all this stuff for me. And I know one of the things that I learned in my professional coaching, I was part of a group called Vistage for many years,
Oh, yes.
which is a professional coaching group.
Mhm.
And the thing they drove home every day was, as the CEO, what is the best use of your time today?
Yeah.
And if that is not chasing emergencies, which one of your team members can actually work on, but your clients are calling you, instead of saying, I'll get back to you, and then you calling your team member who's working on it, just say, what did Bill say? And then simple things like that actually train the client to call Bill first instead of calling you, kind of thing. So there's just
Mhm.
ways to really make your business more efficient.
Yeah.
I want to pivot now to the exit that you had
Mhm.
because you built these companies. You had 45 people by the time you were ready to sell. What were the indicators? You're like, it's time. I want to
Mhm.
sell. What was
Right.
that?
Yeah, man, there were no indicators. There was none. No, I'm joking a little bit, but I hadn't planned it. I did not
Okay.
plan to. I planned to have 5 to 10 more years in the business at least. And so, what happened that changed that? I think a series of, you can call it coincidence, call it God, call it the universe. But just a series of things happened that it was like, probably need to pay attention to this and explore what this would look like. And it started with my business partner getting some idea of valuation from a private equity that he was talking to. And so it started that way. And then it's like, it's just followed the next step and the next step and the next step. Because when I first heard about it, I was like, no, man, we got 5 more years of this. It's not going to make any sense to do right now. And then had a conversation, and then actually had a conversation with a couple of other private equity companies, and it was just a process of being like, okay, I think we can actually, I think we can actually make this make sense right now, and the stars aligning in that time frame. That's really what it was, because it was not in the plan. And I, at some point in there, just had to be like, my plan is not always the best plan, and so we're going to throw that one out, and now we got a new plan, right? And that's part of business too, right? You got to pivot. So yeah, any further questions about that, or I can keep telling the story?
I'd love to dive into the specifics because I know that selling your business is, for me, it was a very emotional process. And I remember the first business I sold, I couldn't even concentrate. We had signed the documents. We were waiting for the company, the buyer, to sign it after the board meeting. And so I was just frozen. I couldn't do any work. So my wife and I went down to the DC car show. We're just hanging out and I'm waiting for the call. My lawyer
Yeah,
finally calls and says, Raj, they countersigned, the deal is done. And it was that moment I had to sit down
yeah.
because it was so weighted with emotion where you're working on this thing that's like, for me, it started out of a spare bedroom and then
Mhm.
here it is, multi-million dollar sale and so on. And what was that process like for you when you said, okay, we're going to go out and we're actually going to sell, we're going to find potential buyers? Describe the due diligence, the negotiations, the timeline, and frankly, the emotions. What was that like?
I'm not scared to jump into the emotions part of it. I will say this, similar experience to you, in that at some point during the sale, and it was probably an 8-month process from first from first
Mm-hmm.
discussion to close. And towards the end, I thinking back, I attribute it to something like a panic attack. Like I had heart problems and all this kind of stuff. And I run
Mhm.
all I'm a healthy guy. But yeah, I'm like, what is going on? This is supposed to be like a great experience and all of that. But yeah, the emotional part of it, the stress part of it, all of that was huge. But yeah, I can definitely relate in that piece. Yeah. So thinking about it, because I had been a part of several transactions already, I knew what was going to be asked when it came time to sell. And we basically already I had a business manager who was fantastic, that ran the finances and the all of the contracts, finances, all of those kind of things. And so I was like, hey, one of your jobs is to keep a data room for us. And that was something that was like, hey, in this, it's like we've got all of our vendors, we've got all of our contracts, we've got all the stuff that they're going to ask for, your payroll stuff, your everything else, essentially keeping it ready to sell. Even though I was like, we're not going to do it anytime soon, we were already like, I don't know that they had a data room completed, and that they were like, oh my gosh, you're already done. There's no way. I
Brian,
was like,
what a key point. What a
yeah.
key point. You were ready to sell because you had all the data ready to go. And I think that's one of the things that makes your company so much easier to buy. Because when a company goes in and says, okay, we want to buy you, and they ask you all the due diligence questions, which is like getting a root canal every single day for it is painful. And they ask you, slice and dice your numbers by this and by that and all kinds of stuff. But when you're ready, if you build your business to flip it, to sell it, and you create this data room, one, it makes growing your business while you still own it much easier because you know what those numbers are. And
Mhm.
then when it's time to buy, like you said, buyer said, here's the stuff we're going to look for. And you said, here's our data room. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that made the process easier, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, we had to move it over to their data room.
Of
That's
course.
fine.
Yeah.
We could do
Yeah.
that. We can just drag and drop. And then but
Yeah.
that, by the way, that doesn't prevent them from asking you by email for things that you've already put into the data room. That one's in the
Happens
data
every
room.
time.
Hey, that one's
Uh,
also in the data room. You
yeah.
asked me to put it there. It's there. Go find it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I remember on one of mine, I had questions and they had like separate spreadsheets that we had to answer from different departments. And there were so many identical questions that one guy wanted to know when another person wanted to know, copy paste the answers into that too. So describe some of the questions. What were some of the really tough questions that you had to go and find information about?
I don't know that there were any huge ones because, like I said, it ended up being a fairly simple process to get things uploaded and all of that. I think some of the stuff, yeah, I'll say this around the QOE was probably where most of the toughest questions were. And walking through, so quality of earnings, they've got one of these huge accounting firms that comes in and just tears apart the numbers and puts them all back together. And so probably the toughest thing was going through those as far as in just answering the questions, right? And then and really justifying ad backs. That's probably one of the bigger things. And hey, we let this person go not to prepare to sell, but because they're or no, we actually didn't let them go. They retired and we're not replacing them. And that's it, right? No, you
Mhm.
have this person, so you're gonna need them back. No, actually, we're not. We just let them work out the end, and they wanted to go, and we weren't planning on rehiring, and those kind of questions that it's you really have to justify for the numbers to work out. And so, yeah, I would say those would probably be some of the toughest things. And so, the advice there would be, hey, if you're gonna make cuts to prepare to sell and all that kind of stuff, do it well in advance so the buyer can see the history
Mhm.
of the business running without that resource or whatever. Yeah, so that's what I'd say for me.
I really appreciate the way you answered that because you're answering it from the perspective of a business person, whereas many MSPs are founded by technical team members, technical people, and oftentimes continue to look at everything in a very technical way. Which I went to engineering school, and I remember my peers. If you ask them a question, they would give you the exact answer to that question without really answering what does that question really mean, and answering the stuff that's really being asked, but not directly. And so I think to your point, to address all those softer issues, I think is pretty
Hmm.
critical in the
Yeah.
process of due diligence.
Yeah, and I'll
Yeah.
add something to that. Since then, I talk to business owners all the time, and especially folks who are further along in their journey that are considering selling in the next 3 years. and they've created lifestyle businesses, so to speak. So there's a lot of maybe personal stuff running through them and all of that. And or they're like, hey, I don't want to pay taxes, so my business doesn't make any money. And I
Mm,
say, that's great for tax purposes. It's terrible if you want to sell your company. And
mhm.
so you got to change it. And there's no way around it. They hate paying taxes, but I'm like, hey, if you don't change it now, you're just going to get less for your business, right? So
Mm.
are you willing to pay X thousand dollars in taxes to earn X hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional value
Yeah.
when you go to sell? So that's something big that I've seen a lot more lately. It's, hey, build it to sell, not to. You want to be tax efficient, yes, but you're going to have to pay some taxes if you want a big valuation. Yeah.
Yeah. Brian, I want to move to a quick speed round here. I got some
Oh,
rapid fire
okay.
questions for
Rapid.
you.
Let's go.
All right. So, what's the most common mistake that you see your MSP coaching clients make?
Most common mistake. I'm going to go back to being the center of the business and yeah, trying to do everything themselves. Really going back to to delegation and finding your who's that you need to actually delegate things to in order for the business to be able to grow.
What's the book that most impacted your life?
I'm going to go with, so I'll go with most impacted my life lately. The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. Fantastic book. Talks all about how we set upper limits for ourselves unconsciously. We tend to run into ceilings and how to break through those and work in your zone of genius.
What's the best counter into advice that you can share?
Slow down to speed up.
That's a good one. I like that one very much so. It is so true.
Especially with growing a business. Like, just slow down. Have real conversations, have deep conversations. If you want your growth to happen, you got to slow down a little bit, have the right conversations with the right people in order to speed up.
You know, one of the guys in my coaching peer group used to call these. He used to go on imagination mornings, and he would go to a hotel that's nearby, just get a coffee, and just sit and just start thinking about his business. Phone was turned off, and he'd come back with tons of ideas. So slowing
Yeah.
down, such a critical thing. What is your routine, or do you have a ritual for staying consistent? Because consistency is also pretty key in being able to grow your business.
Yeah. No. Yeah, I think I'll just speak to rituals in general in creating habit around things that you want to do. Like, I've said to my wife now and again, I'm like, because is it in regards to like exercise, for instance, right? I'm like, I don't even remember deciding to go on a run this morning. I just
Mm,
got up and put on my stuff and went out and ran. And 2 hours later, I'm like, when did I decide I was going to do that? I don't. It's just habit, right? So
mhm.
creating the habits that you want in your life to achieve the results that you want to achieve.
Yeah, I think that book by James Clear, Atomic Habits, wonderful one
Yes.
to use as a guide.
Yeah.
What
I
is
might
your
have
best
stolen that from
advice?
there. I don't know.
Okay. What's your best advice for an MSP trying to get past $1 million?
Past 1 million.
They're trying to break that 1 million hurdle.
Yeah. I'll go with having the owner really focused in on sales to the detriment of other things at that
Hmm.
phase. Yeah. I think too often we get caught up in the technical and the putting out fires and all of that. And this goes back to delegation somewhat. But yeah, really having the owner focused on the sales piece and bringing in consistent business.
What's the worst advice you ever got?
Worst advice. I'm gonna go with I'm gonna go with this. Oh gosh, and I'm probably gonna botch it, but something along the lines of if you can leave the office for 2 weeks and things don't fall apart, you're not working hard enough.
That's and that goes to your point of slow down to speed up, right? Because you
Yeah,
need to take some time to breathe.
yeah. I'm like
Very,
I think the exact opposite is true. Like, if you're working well and you're delegating and leading, if you're leading well, people shouldn't notice your absence because
yeah.
things run smoothly.
That's right. You have a business where you can go away for the 2 weeks, you come back and you still have a business.
There you go.
So
Yes.
that's really good.
Yeah.
Brian, thank you for an insightful conversation. How can people reach you, and what's next for you? What are you most excited about?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, you can reach me on LinkedIn. So I'm Brian Hoppe, Hope, and then I've also got something people can download. It's a guide as far as, hey, here are the 9 things that I think are most important as in order to scale your MSP to 5 million, 10 million and beyond. And that's at discovery.brianhoppe.com. So they can go check that out. And that's just something that's a gift. And then yeah, what's next, man? I'm just excited to help people, right? So to help MSP owners achieve their version of success. So my goal is to help 100 MSPs to achieve success for themselves, whatever that looks like for them, whether that's selling or that kind of a thing. So yeah, that's what's next for me.
Very good. Brian, it was a wonderful conversation. I think a lot of people are going to get some good value out of just all the nuggets that you shared. Thanks again for joining me.
Thanks so much, Raj.